Hi, this is Dwight Lee. I'm the co-author of Microeconomics for MBAs, and this module is going to be about the CEO pay. Let's look at just a few examples of CEO compensation in 2004. This came out of the Wall Street Journal a few months ago. These guys are doing pretty well. They're not doing as well as they did a few years ago, actually, but that varies because a lot of the pay varies a great deal depending on whether they're exercising options or not. But this is just kind of your standard pay. 8.3 for the CEO of General Electric, Jeffrey Immelt. The poor guy in the bunch is poor Warren Buffett, who only made $0.1 million, $100,000. But that's very misleading. He owned a stock worth $34.6 billion with a B in stock, so he's doing pretty well. Bank of America, the CEO there, Ken Lewis, over $19 million. Citicorp, the financial institutions tend to pay their CEOs very good. I think Prince is a former CEO of Citicorp. I'm not quite sure of that. $17.3 million in 2004. O'Neill, Merrill Lynch, $32 million as CEO. Dan Amos, the famous talking duck, Affleck, $3.4 million. He's making ends meet, but that's certainly not the most impressive salary, CEO salary, that you can find. What I want to do in this module is try to justify these high CEO salaries by mentioning some things that most people don't take into consideration when they're talking about CEO salary. There's simply a lot for a corporation to gain from identifying and promoting managers who are really good at making decisions, motivating and inspiring others, cutting through all the clutter, and getting into the important job of getting right to the heart of the matter and putting in long hours and highly focused effort. These guys are good. When they get to be CEOs, when they get in upper management, they're good. Most people don't know what they do. We can't see how good they are, like we can see how good Tiger Woods is, or we can see how good Michael Jordan was when he was playing basketball. But these guys are good, and there's a lot to be gained by identifying them and paying enough to keep them. There's a lot of information in the firm on how good these managers are. They spend a lot of time looking at these guys, and once they promote one to high position, they better be prepared to pay them a lot of money, because if they don't, there's going to be a situation where somebody else is going to grab them off. Let's look at some specific reasons for high pay. CEOs have a strong incentive. The high pay for CEOs establishes a strong incentive for lower level managers to perform well in order to improve their chances to become a CEO. It's a little bit like a tournament pay. People are going to work harder if the tournament pays off well, if you win it, if you get the brass ring, or if you get near the top, than if you don't. So in some sense, the high CEO pay is not just for the CEO's performance, although most of it is. In some sense, it's a signal that there's a real payoff from working hard and increasing your chances to move up the corporate ladder yourself. Since the CEO is not likely to ever get another promotion based on good performance, certainly not within the same company, maintaining his or her motivation to do a good job requires a strong, direct incentive. And that is particularly important when considering the decisions made by CEOs of major companies where there's a lot riding on the profitability, there's a lot riding on them making good decisions. If you can get somebody that just makes the decision with a slightly higher probability, the right decision with a slightly higher probability than the other guy, you can be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Also, the CEO will typically have a lot of latitude and broader discretion to do what he or she wants, and so you want use this pay to keep their incentives lined up with the interest of the corporation. Also, promoting someone to CEO, as I mentioned earlier, provides a great deal of information to other companies that this individual is good. These companies have spent a lot of time nurturing and promoting and looking at the people who eventually become top corporate managers. They know a lot about them. Once those managers, or once those people are promoted to the top position, the word is out. Everybody knows they're good. And so if a company wants to make sure that their new CEO is not pirated away by another company, they have a strong incentive to pay them extremely well. Let me give you an interesting example of this. There were 3 strong candidates to succeed Jack Welch as CEO of General Electric: Jeff Immelt, Bob Darnelli, and Jim McNerney. When Immelt got the job, Darnelli and McNerney were immediately snapped up for CEO positions in big companies. Darnelli became the CEO of Home Depot within weeks. Probably within minutes he got the offer. McNerney became CEO of 3M, and recently he's become CEO of Boeing. When those 2 guys, before they were in the running, before it became obvious that they were in the running to become the CEO of General Electric, no one knew much about them. But once it became clear that they were not good enough apparently to become the CEO, but almost, other companies immediately moved in and snatched them up. So when you promote someone to CEO, you better be prepared to pay them, or somebody else might get them. Now, this is less of a problem in Japan and other countries where CEO salaries are lower than in the U.S., but these are countries where people are much less likely to move from company to company, although that does seem to be changing recently. Of course, by not just paying CEOs a lot of money, but by tying the amount that they receive to the performance of the company's stock, can be a good idea. The hope is to line up the incentives of the key managers to those of the shareholders. The alignment of interest can never be perfect, but firms have experienced better growth when they line up CEO salaries and high corporate salaries, management salaries with stock. And it's also possible to try different approaches with a stock-based pay. For example, you can encourage managers to take a long-run perspective by designing deferred compensation schemes that are tied to future value of the company's stock. You can give them these stock options, company stock. You don't allow them to exercise those options or sell that stock until maybe 3, 4, 5 years after they've stepped down as CEO. That provides them a strong motivation when they are CEO to take a long-run perspective. And it also encourages a CEO to do something that's very important, and that is to do a good job searching for the strongest possible candidate to replace him or her as CEOs. Of course, corporate executives have a strong motivation to protect their job in the face of takeovers or mergers, even if the takeover or merger is in the best interest of the shareholder. And that provides a justification, at least a possible justification, for these golden parachutes that a lot of people find objectionable. You know, when somebody gets taken over, maybe because they weren't a very good manager, the concern is, well, why did they pay that individual? He or she wasn't that good a manager. Why did they pay them so much when they fail? Well, one answer could be because as CEO, they're in a position to stymie, to put roadblocks in the path of a takeover that would be good for the company and good for the shareholders. And that golden parachute, if you will, can be useful in terms of motivating a CEO to step aside and let that company be taken over. Another situation that, very similar situation that often gets discussed in the headlines of your local newspaper is the CEO that failed that ends up with a tremendous severance package. Again, why are you awarding CEOs that fail? Well, in many cases what happens is you have a company that's in trouble. They want to bring in a CEO that might turn that company around. Now, they don't want to hire a college professor like McKinsey and me to do that. That wouldn't make any sense. They want to find somebody that's an experienced CEO, somebody that's done a good job, is doing a good job with another company. So they would go and try to recruit, say, an experienced and successful CEO with another company. But the question is, why would another CEO, why would that CEO want to come to a company that's in trouble, maybe tarnish their reputation, because there's a good chance that nobody's going to be able to turn this company around? Well, one way to get a good CEO to come and take over a company that's in trouble is to not only pay them a lot, but maybe not pay them as much as you'd have to, because you'll provide them a good severance package. You have a contract that says, look, if you fail, you're going to do all right. You're going to be able to walk away from this with a very attractive severance package. And so in many cases, what we see is that a CEO who fails and gets this large severance package is a CEO that's just getting what he or she deserves according to the contract that was written. Now, after the fact, maybe the contract wasn't ideal. Maybe that wasn't the CEO to do the job, but we never make these decisions after all the information is in, and it could have been that before the fact that this was a very reasonable thing to do, make these nice severance package promises to CEOs that ultimately fail because before the fact they look like the best person to give the company a chance to get on its feet. What about the fact that CEOs in the U.S. receive more compensation than do those in other countries? In Germany and Japan, CEOs, for example, are paid quite a bit less than they are in the U.S. And they're given very little performance incentive in the form of stock options and stock-based compensation. Now, that's one reason they don't get paid as much. Much of the high pay that CEOs in America get are because of that stock-based compensation. But there's an explanation for this. In Japan and Europe, the job of the CEO is a very different job than that of the CEO in the United States. CEOs in Japan traditionally have relied, for example, very much on consensus reached by a large board, and this is true of Europe as well. Large boards that include labor union leaders, government officials, and banks. These CEOs simply have more of a ceremonial role than do U.S. CEOs, where the U.S. CEOs is really making decisions, can make critical decisions that affect the viability and the profitability of the firm. That is much less true in Japan and Europe. Now again, they're moving in our direction here. They're trying to free up the corporations from making quicker decisions and maybe more risky decisions in some sense, to not have them tied down to large boards that try to micromanage everything and no one can get a consensus on anything. But when you have somebody that can make decisions, that's when you start finding pay goes up, because it's very important to get people who can make good decisions. So those are some ideas, some arguments as to why U.S. CEOs make as much as they do. Now, no one really knows how much a CEO should make. I'm not arguing, and we're not arguing, that CEOs make the right amount, that they should make more. The pay of a CEO is determined by a process that responds to the influence of literally millions of people. People as investors, consumers, and corporate officials, And we obviously want to improve the process that determines how CEOs are chosen and how they're rewarded. We'd like to improve that process to motivate CEOs to do a better job as agents to their principals, the stockholders of the corporation, which means using resources wisely to produce better products at lower cost and increase the profitability of the firm. And corporations and their managers are under constant competitive pressures to improve these processes, and doing so in a way that can improve their market share and their profits. And improving corporate processes can affect CEO salaries. But that is very much a secondary concern. The important concern is the making the companies more profitable, making them more efficient. That's the real reason for improving CEO or corporate processes. And the effect that they have on CEO salaries is, like I say, a secondary concern. They might reduce CEO salaries, but it's also true that improving corporate processes might increase CEO salaries by making the CEO more valuable, by motivating them to do an even better job than most of them are doing today. So, something to think about when next time you're at a party and hear people complaining about high CEO salaries. Good being with you. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned from it. And hope you enjoyed the book, Microeconomics for MBAs.